Good evening from Sacred Space at Titania's Realm. I thought I'd read to you from Bloody Brisbane, Murder in the River City, presented by Jack Sim. Let me just find the page. Chapter 5, Without a Trace, Disappearance at Central, 1938, written by Tom Hampstead. But before we continue, I'll show you the photos. Here is Central Railway Station, allegedly the last place Marjorie Rose Norville was seen alive. It was here that Miss Norville was supposed to catch a train to Bundaberg, a journey she was never to undertake. Source Private Collection of J. Sim. And below is the executive building where Miss Norville worked. Source also Private Collection of J. Sim. An air of mystery floats over a subtle but decidedly unpleasant aroma which surrounds the disappearance of Marjorie Norville. This fascinating drama caused the most expensive police investigation in Queensland to that date, costing a massive £1,000, approximately $100,000. 10 boxes containing as many as 10 million words sit quietly hidden away in the state government archives. They seem to challenge those who would search them to find a chink, a motive, a glimmer, or perhaps, as a long shot, a definitive answer to the many questions that persist after 60-odd years. It's a challenge that hasn't yet been met. No trace has ever been found of the popular, socially active Marjorie, whose career peaked when Premier Forgan Smith's wife selected her to be her social secretary, a position Marjorie held until 11th of November 1938. The year 1938 had been a busy time for this attractive and vivacious 30-year-old. Late in the previous year, she had met Jack Caton, a Ford travelling salesman, and had fallen in love with him. They had spent a couple of weekends away together, but the romance seemed to run into difficulties around mid-year, and Jack claimed that she had severed the relationship around August. At this time, she fell back on her long-term friend, James East, as a continuing companion. Her health at a low ebb earlier in the year seemed to be improving since her holiday in September on a cruise with her friend Mercia Doran to Spencer's Gulf in South Australia. She had been looking tired and wan before this break, but after her return she certainly looked better and she had put on some weight. Her dressmaker had chided her about this, and Marjorie, in her normal competent way, had passed it off with a joke. Her health wasn't all plain sailing, however, as she had for the past month or so been suffering from indigestion, and she had to limit her breakfast to fruit. She felt unwell in the mornings. She had been visiting Dr. Luddy, spelt Luddy, for treatment of these symptoms, and he was credited with causing her to look much better, her friend Monsieur Doran said. Here's a picture of her, Miss Norval, looking glamorous just before she disappeared without trace in November 1938. A victim of politics, someone knew what became of her, but the details were covered up, and the source of this lovely photograph of her is the Norval family. On 8th of November 1938, Marjorie wrote to her aunt in Bundaberg, telling her that she was going to Southport to accompany the sister of the Premier's wife for a long weekend. The sister was to be released from a mental institution for arrest. That reads a bit strangely, because surely you go to a mental institution for arrest. Well, I guess you don't get much rest in a mental institution, although I've never made the ward, so I wouldn't know about that. I mean, you almost have to laugh. Dear goddess. But anyway, what do they say? The definition of insanity is making the same mistake over and over and over again, and yet I still haven't made the ward. Damn it! But I'm okay with that. My doctor takes very good care of me, and is very soul-nourishing and loving and protective indeed. Anyway, where was I? In the letter, she said, by loving, I mean, in his therapeutic capacity, and I think sus people are there. Just needed to clarify that point. In the letter, she said that she would return to Brisbane on 17th of November because she had to accompany Mrs. Forgan Smith to a function at the Bellevue Hotel on November 18th. On 10th of November at about 12:30 p.m, Marjorie called Mrs. Byrne of the Bellevue Hotel to make arrangements for Mrs. Forgan Smith's party on the 18th of November and, before leaving, told her that she would call back on the following Wednesday to make final arrangements. On Friday, 11th of November, over the lunchtime break, a lady fitting Marjorie's description and with an identical signature to hers withdrew £30 from Marjorie's account in the Commonwealth Bank and changed other small change into £20, making £50 and £10 notes that she had available for the weekend and which she took from the bank. Between 3 p.m. and 4 p.m. on 11th of November, Marjorie rang her sister, Mrs. Macpherson, who had visited a doctor that day. She asked Mrs. Macpherson how she got on at the doctor's. Then she said that she was about to leave Brisbane to drive to Maroochydore on a confidential assignment for the Premier's wife. Earlier, Marjorie had told Monsieur Doran, a close friend who went on holidays and lived in the Albert Hotel with her, that she was driving to Maroochydore to accompany the sister of Mrs. Forgan Smith on a short supervised break from the Willowbank Mental Hospital where she was hospitalised. She told Doran that this was a particularly secret mission and that Stuart, the chauffeur to the Premier, was not being allowed to drive the party as he could not keep his mouth shut. She also told Doran that Mr. George Smith, eldest son of the Premier, was to drive to Willowburn to pick up the party and that Marjorie was to pick her up in the boss's Ford. a departmental car, and that another lady who was not named was to accompany them. She later told Doran that the trip had been postponed for a week and would commence on the evening of the 11th of November. At about 11:30 a.m. on 11th of November, Marjorie rang her long-term friend, Mr. James East, the manager of AP Greenwoods and Co., optometrists, and made arrangements for him to pick her up at the Albert Hotel at 6:45 p.m. and drive her to the Central Railway Station, from where she informed him she was to leave on a train to visit her relations in Bundaberg. This he did, dropping her at the station in Ann Street, and following his inquiry, she assured him her tickets were fine. She then told him she would ring him next Thursday and reminded him to get their tickets for the next Saturday night. They had permanent reservations for Saturday nights at the Regent Theatre. She then walked towards the station entrance, and East drove off to go to the Tattersalls Club. He didn't know that there was no train to Bundaberg until 9 p.m. that night, and as he didn't travel much on trains, there was no need for him to know. During those few seconds when Marjorie walked towards the railway station in Ann Street, and whilst East drove off to go to his club, began a mystery still unsolved to this day. Since then there has not been one confirmed sighting of Marjorie. She disappeared without a trace. On Thursday, 17th of November, East rang her office and was told that she wasn't at work. He then phoned her friend, Mercia Doran, who hadn't seen her either, and then he rang the Macphersons, who told him that everything was all right, that she was doing some confidential work for the Premier's wife. He went to the Albert Hotel for dinner that night and saw Mercia Doran. She told him not to make a fuss, as this could be putting Marjorie in a difficult position excuse me, if he did so. On Wednesday, 19th of November, Marjorie had not arrived at work. She didn't arrive on Thursday either, and on Friday, when she wasn't there, her supervisor sent a telegram to Bundaberg, where at the time she made application for leave, she said she was going. The telegram asked her why she wasn't at work. Her aunt and uncle, alarmed by the telegram, then set the wheels in motion to find her. After a ring around of contacts and much consternation about the popular and attractive lady, the police were notified, and finally the public were informed that Marjorie Rose Norval was missing. From the small start, a massive investigation developed. When news of her disappearance was confided to the public, there was instant and overwhelming interest in what had happened to her. In Queensland's history, the only case to attract a similar degree of interest from the public has been the disappearance of Daniel Morecambe on the Sunshine Coast in 2003. So prolific was the response to Marjorie's disappearance that 12 detectives were employed following leads. Police carried out thousands of interviews, including over 800 cab drivers. In a search for her body, hundreds of patches of disturbed just one moment, just had a message, a business message, which is the first time ever. It's probably somebody playing a prank. I get pranksters from time to time. bit unusual. I've only had my little Titania's realm business up for a few years and I've never had anyone show any interest before, so it's probably just someone's idea of a joke. We'll just see. You can watch this live, people, or not live, but as it unfurls, this new development. I'm sure it's just someone playing a trick. You get so many trolls and spammers and scammers on Instagram and Facebook that most of the time I don't take it too seriously. Anyway. Right, where was I? Interrupted by the potential of actually selling something. Oh, isn't that exciting? That would be a twist. You have to laugh. Anyway, where was I? Yes. In a search for her body, hundreds of patches of disturbed earth in southeastern Queensland were opened to reveal the rotting carcasses of dogs, cats, poultry, horses, Jersey cows, and other animals. Recently used graves in cemeteries throughout Brisbane were tested with an iron bar to ensure that another body had not been crowded into the grave. The snoops of society were ever present. There was very little that escaped the attention of prying eyes in this small city. And why I'm suspicious that it's a time waster is they asked to file for free shipping, and it's also someone that sells gemstones, so it's a bit of an odd question coming from someone that sells stones. Anyway. And then they've obsessively gone through and liked dozens of posts, so not necessarily a scammer, but it's a bit odd, people there. It's a bit odd. Anyway, I'll just ignore that. Now that I know that they're a gem seller, why would they worry what I'm doing, whether I offer shipping or not? Just going to put the aircon on and grab a glass for my water. Yeah, just as I suspected. Sorry, I sent this to the wrong person. Okay, no problem. So I'm right, they were just trying to lure me in with their looking at their stuff, and I'm not interested. Sorry, not interested. Because it pisses me off when people play games. It really does. Right. Just charge my phone. I'm in a unique position that I don't actually care if I sell anything or not. I mean, it'd be great if I could get my business established, but I'm not prepared to play games and do weird little dances with strangers on the internet like that. First they will ask me if I did free shipping and then said, oh, sorry, that was by accident, but oh, look at all my stones. So you see, psychopathic. Instead of being honest up front, saying, would you be interested in looking at my wares, which I might have been, had they been direct. See, I'm like this, right across the board. Play games with me? Can't be bothered. Instant block and delete. I haven't blocked them yet though. I'll just let them play themselves out. That's what usually happens. Eventually they get bored playing silly buggers and they don't get attention. Speaks volumes about all sorts of aspects of my life, doesn't it? Oh, smallest violin. Right, anyway, where were we? The snoops of society were ever present. Just going to get out of that because I don't want to be distracted by any more nonsense. There was very little that escaped the attention of prying eyes in this small city. Marjorie's best friend and close companion, Mercia Doran. I don't know why I had soup for dinner and it's just sitting like a lump in my chest. Oh, anyway, it shouldn't be sitting on me. Marjorie's best friend and close companion, Mercia Doran, worked for the railway department and lived in a room close to Marjorie in the Albert Hotel in King George Square. Their rooms were on the second floor and their windows opened onto the balcony of the Tivoli Theatre about 40 feet away. The cleaner at the Tivoli, Mr. Parsons, was interviewed and stated that from the roof garden of the Tivoli Theatre, an uninterrupted view could be obtained of the inside of Marjorie Norville's room. The report states, this sounds pretty bloody creepy to me, quite frankly. Listen to this. He was stalking her, the dirty bugger. Anyway, while cleaning the theatre during his hours of duty, Mr. Parsons states that he has seen Miss Norville in her room frequently and that prior to her going on holidays on the 19th of September last, she had male friends in her room almost nightly. These men would almost invariably get into bed with her, some of them putting out the light before doing so, but others would not. Consequently, he could see what was going on in the room. He could see right into the bed in Miss Norville's room. He further alleges that since Miss Norville's return from holidays, she appeared to live a comparatively quiet life and that he rarely saw any person in her room. Miss Doran also had numerous male persons in her room at night time, but as she always closed the door, he was not able to see into the room. Creepy as fuck, isn't it? Creepy as fuck, people there. Anyway, very few people could command the loyalty that Marjorie had. Her family were adamant that she was close to all of them in every respect. She had many male friends and liked male company. Some of her friends were doctors and others from government and industry, and indeed from a range of levels in the social strata. Every one of these friends strenuously defended her and her integrity in a solid wall of protection. Only under the pressure of direct evidence did James East admit that he had been intimate with Marjorie, and even though it is certain that Caton also had relations with her, he denied it strenuously and maintained this position. So I wonder where the author gets the idea that he had relations with her when he strenuously denied it, because where's the evidence, people of Earth? There's a lot of casting of aspersions on her good name, in my opinion. But anyway. So what happened to Marjorie Norval, and what about her stories? Were these an accidental web of fabrications, or a clever set of distractions, a sinister plot to deceive, or a human reaction to personal distress? Did Marjorie Norval have some personal problems that she concealed, and these problems became entangled with someone who couldn't allow his name to be involved? What do we make of all of this? Well, the cleaner was a pervert to start with. He'd be my top suspect, by the way, quite frankly. Anyway, where was I? What about the investigation? Why would the disappearance of a typist in the public service attract such attention, money, and innuendo? Or indeed, was the investigation a clever, even diabolical system of cover-up and concealment of a larger reality by people in prominent positions who may have been seen in Marjorie and Mercia's rooms late at night? Somewhere in those 10 cartons and their tens of millions of words, there may be an answer. Right, missing person. The Police Gazette detailing the facts for police across Queensland. The search was the largest and most expensive missing persons investigation of the pre-World War II era. Thousands of leads were followed up across the state without success. Source: Queensland Police Gazette, Saturday, 26th of November, 1938. I won't bother reading all the volumes and blah blah blah. So, there she is. Never been found. That beautiful woman. I'll read the description because I found it rather interesting. CI Branch, Brisbane. The following is a description of Marjorie Rose Norval, who was employed in the public service and left her office in the executive buildings on the 11th of the 11th, 1938, on leave to the 15th of November, 1938. She was last seen at 7 p.m, 11th of the 11th, 38, at Central Railway Station, when she stated she was going to Bundaberg to visit relatives. 30 years of age, 5 feet 6 or 7 inches high, medium build, fairly well covered hips, dark brown hair, nearly black, waved and dressed close to head, noticeable blue eyes, slightly freckled complexion, but makes up to hide freckles. Who doesn't? Me no more, because I don't care anymore. Freckled arms, somewhat anemic appearance, manicured fingernails, short and maybe painted, some false teeth upper jaw, wearing a lady's gold wristlet watch, oblong shape, similar to JRB 88, slightly larger. Right, that's that story. And now I will read you chapter 6, The Man in Grey. Evil Walks the Streets of Town, 1945, written by Jack Sim. Here's the crime scene. Above the scene of the first shooting, rear entrance to the lavatory which opened onto a lane leading to the wharves near the customs house, by which the killer made his escape after the shooting. The Courier Mail, Friday, 12th of January 1945, and left. The doorway of the public lavatory in the lane leading from Queen Street to the Circular Quay wharves. In the doorway, the victim collapsed and died. Source: the Courier Mail, Saturday, 13th of January 1945, page 3. So there's the, I'm just coming a bit closer, wait for my camera to focus because it's weird people are there. And there's the lavatory door where the victim fell dead. Awful way, awful place to die. Front of the loo, on the loo, or near a loo. Anyway. It was a typically busy Thursday afternoon. The northern end of Queen Street at Petrie Bight was alive with people going about their business. The population of Brisbane was swollen, with tens of thousands of United States troops stationed here, the headquarters of the Pacific War effort, headed by the legendary General Douglas MacArthur. World War II was slowly and surely winding to a close. Within 6 months, it would finally be over. The end was in sight. Germany was close to collapse, and the Japanese inevitably would be defeated. It was just a matter of time. Soon troops would be able to return home to their families, who eagerly awaited their return across the Pacific. For 2 American troops far from the conflict, tragically, it was not to be. Can you imagine being murdered just a few months shy of the end of the war? Like, it's just so fucking unfair. They weren't even killed in combat. They were just murdered just before the end of the war. It's outrageous. At 3 p.m, 11th of January 1945, a shot rang out near the Customs House building. Several persons heard the sound and looked around, trying to determine the source. Seconds later, a mysterious man, dressed in a plain patterned dark grey suit and a dark grey felt hat, strode out of the underground public lavatory in front of the historic building. He crossed Queen Street and near Adelaide Street boarded a Clayfield-bound tram. No one tried to stop him. Moments later, an American Army officer, Lieutenant Alan C. Middleton, aged 34, staggered to the doorway of the toilet block and collapsed in a pool of blood. Bleeding from serious wounds in his chest and left arm, he cried out, "Help! Help! I am going to die!" Lieutenant Middleton, far from home, died in the arms of a stranger who was passing by. Military personnel ran to the scene. They had seen the wounded man and raced from their post at a nearby wharf to assist him. An ambulance raced the victim to an American military hospital, but nothing could be done to revive him. More than 50 detectives, assisted by American provosts, searched for the killer. The entire Brisbane CIB was thrown into the search for the civilian. All exits from the city and state were placed under strict watch. Despite the massive response, early the next morning he had still not been found. The Courier Mail published a description of the wanted man. Age 38 to 44, height 5 feet 10 inches to 6 feet 1 inch, medium athletic build, high cheekbones, fairly prominent straight nose. He leans slightly forward when walking and takes a fairly long step. The killer's appearance and dress led to his infamous description as the sinister man in grey. Before we continue, I'll just show you these photos. Left is the first victim, US Army officer Lieutenant Alan C. Middleton, 34, mortally wounded by the man in grey. Source the Courier Mail, Saturday the 13th of January 1945, page 3. And below is the sawn-off .22 rifle that was used to kill him. It says, the .22 sawn-off rifle reproduced here is almost its original size and was tendered as exhibit. I should say as an exhibit at the later trial. The Courier Mail, Friday, 9th of February 1945, page 1. Doesn't look all that big, does it, considering it's just resting on the tips of that man's fingers. I always thought they were much larger guns for some reason. Oh well, there's a lot I don't know, even at 60 years of age. People try to take advantage of my naivete at times. Oh well. For 13 days, the town was gripped by fear. This was wartime Brisbane. Fear of air raids by the dreaded Japanese or attacks from midget submarines was always present. Adding to the horror, rumours, driven by intense fear, fueled many different versions of the crime and cemented them into the minds of locals already affected by the stress of the war. People claimed to have seen the creepy man in grey all over town, wandering the silent streets of South Brisbane, the dark lanes of Fortitude Valley, and the ancient alleys of Spring Hill. It was said the evil killer lurked inside public toilets and lay in wait in air raid shelters to get anyone who sought protection within. Terrified, people stayed at home. Brisbane, which had run 24 hours a day since the Yanks had arrived, was like a ghost town. Some claimed there had been as many as 13 murders the police were covering up to avoid a complete public panic. It was the closest thing to London's Jack the Ripper Brisbane had ever known. Despite an intense police dragnet, the man wanted for the killing remained at large. The crime made US servicemen particularly jittery. They became more wary of Australians than usual. There had been tensions between United States and Australian servicemen since the arrival of the Americans in Brisbane in 1942. There had been several altercations over time, the most infamous being the so-called Battle of Brisbane in 1943, when a mob of angry Australian servicemen on leave, attacked a group of US soldiers after a young Aussie serviceman had been killed. Several other murders, shootings and stabbings of servicemen had also marred the presence of these foreign visitors in the town. All parties had grown wary of each other. Crime scene 2. The scene of the second shooting, house in Denman Street, Alderley, where an American naval officer was fatally wounded. The sources, the Courier Mail, Thursday 25th of January 1945, page 3. And on the same source on the same day, left the steps at the rear of the house up which the assailant climbed. The shots were fired in the doorway at the head of the stairs. So there's the house at the front, and there's the doorway and the top of the stairs from which he fired shots at the naval officer. Police were initially confused. Robbery was not a motive, as money in Middleton's pocket was not touched. Days passed and speculation turned to consideration of whether he had been the victim of a failed attempt at sex perversion. The toilets where the poor serviceman had met his fate were a notorious hangout for perverts, as homosexual loiterers were then known. Inquiries with known associates of Middleton's by the police yielded no clear leads as to a motive. Poor Lieutenant Middleton had only been in Brisbane a few weeks and had made few new friends. They could not account for why he was anywhere near the public toilets. Well, one would presume he needed to go to the toilet. Anyway, police made some progress. They had the bullet which had killed Middleton examined by a ballistics expert. He determined that the .22 caliber bullet had been fired from a cut-down pea rifle. Police began checking all known pea rifles in the Brisbane area. That explains why it looks so small. Then on Wednesday, 24th of January, at a house at Denman Street, Alderley, the man in grey struck again. Police had been responding to a call at 4:35 p.m. that there had been shots in Farrington Street, Alderley, but upon arrival found nothing that supported the reports. Rounding the corner into nearby Denman Street, officers noticed a back door wide open and decided on a hunch to enter the home. Inside, they found American Navy Chief Petty Officer John David McCollum lying on a bed. McCollum was bleeding profusely from where he had been shot in the abdomen. Although dying, he gave the police a detailed description of the man who had shot him. It fitted that of the sinister man in grey. His assailant apparently climbed the rear steps of the house that McCollum was renting in Denman Street. McCollum heard a knock at the back door and in response opened it. As he did so, a man shot him at point-blank range in the abdomen. After shooting McCollum, the man ran from the property. The naval officer was rushed to hospital. Despite an operation to try to save his life, he died there at 10 p.m, becoming the second victim of the terrible killer. Less than an hour later, police arrested Frederick William Everest, aged 34. Everest was working at a local bakery. When questioned, he gave his reason for the shootings. Those Yanks have been after me for a long time. They tried to poison me once. Later, after being formally arrested, Everest added, "I'm sorry, but it had to be. Those Yanks were after me, and I had to get in first." Everest, as it turned out, was a discharged returned soldier. He had seen 4.5 years' service and had lived in Brisbane all his life. He was married and came from a respectable family. In March 1945, a jury found Everest to be mentally ill. He was kept in strict custody until a decision was made as to his future. He eventually went to a mental hospital where he lived for the rest of his days. Everest died in May 1977, so 32 years after the murders, aged 66 years. He was interred at Mount Gravatt Cemetery on Brisbane's south side. The man in grey, who killed 2 Allied troops, was buried in the Anzac section with those who served their country in wartime. An interesting legacy of the crime was that dark grey suits went out of fashion in Brisbane. A tailor from the time recalled that no one requested a suit made of that colour until nearly 2 decades later. No one would dare wear a colour that was associated with such dreadful crimes. Dark grey suits filled the city's various thrift shops as people disposed of their garments. Expensive suits were rendered unwearable. Brisbane's homeless eagerly ignored this bizarre fashion trend and were, for a time, very well dressed. So above we have a photograph of the second victim, US Naval Officer, Chief Petty Officer John D. McCollum, fatally shot by the man in grey. From the Courier Mail, Friday, 26th of January 1945, page 3. And on the right, killer, Frederick William Everest, 34, the man in grey, as he appeared in the police court. His rationale for the murders was bizarre and the product of a deluded mind. Source: The Courier Mail, Friday, 26th of January 1945. Chapter 7. Death Before Dishonour, The Arcade Murder, 1947, written by Alicia Bennett. Crime scene. Albert Street looking across Adelaide Street intersection. The 3 windows of the Baths Institute which faced Albert Street of the white Art Deco Wallace Bishop Arcade building can be seen in the middle of the photograph. And left, Baths Medical Institute. Crowds of stunned onlookers pack the footpath in Albert Street as Bronia Armstrong's body was transferred to the Brisbane morgue. An arrow chillingly indicates room 5, where the young woman's body was discovered. The BAF sign under the window became known as Bronya Armstrong's final struggle. It was eventually taken down. Source: The Telegraph, 11th of January 1947, page 1, and the above photo is from the State Library, Queensland. Here's the window where she was found murdered. For their 19-year-old daughter's epitaph, William and Vanda Armstrong decided that the following words be inscribed upon the small bronze-plated niche that would contain her ashes. Death chosen before dishonour. When making the necessary arrangements following the murder of his daughter, Bronya Mary Armstrong, William Armstrong Sr. could not possibly have foreseen that over 2,000 strangers would line the streets of Brisbane between K.M. Smith's funeral parlour and the Mount Thompson crematorium overlooking the city, or anticipate the multitude of women who would stand in silent support outside the Brisbane District Court during the proceedings of the man who would stand trial for her willful murder. Those who knew Bronya described her as vivacious. She was certainly an attractive girl, blue-eyed with honeyed hair and an hourglass figure. What is also evident by how vigorously she fought for her life is that, above all, Bronya was courageous. Of course she was. With a name like Armstrong, she clearly had Scottish ancestors, and, well, you know what the Scots are like. Brave. Mostly. Depends on the personality of the person, of course. But anyway. Brisbane in 1947. The year of Bronya's murder was often described as a big country town, particularly in contrast to the southern capitals of Sydney and Melbourne. In the aftermath of World War II, industry was burgeoning despite strife within the labour force, primarily involving miners and wharfies. Trams and buses crisscrossed the city, spilling commuters into Fortitude Valley and the CBD. It was such that on the humid summer morning of Friday, 10th of January, Bronya and her childhood friend Norma Dobson caught the bus into town, agreeing before they parted to meet for lunch later that day, neither knowing that it would be the last time they would spend in one another's company. After leaving Norma, Bronya made her way through the heart of Brisbane to the Wallace Bishop Arcade in Albert Street, to the Brisbane Associated Friendly Society Medical Institute, BAFSI, where she worked as a stenographer for the Institute's 49-year-old accountant and secretary, Reginald Wingfield Spence Brown. After meeting Norma for lunch, Bronya returned to her office adjacent to Brown's and resumed her duties for the afternoon. As was custom, at 3 p.m, Dr. Horseman and Nurse Major left the institute. They would return at 5:30 p.m. to recommence the clinic the evening. As a rule, Bronya finished work at 4:30 p.m, while Brown often worked late, tending to accounts. Before we read further, I'll just show you the two photographs. On the left is victim Bronya Mary Armstrong, aged 18. Just a teenager by the gods. Well, technically a young adult since she can vote at 18, but, well, still really a teenager. Above, killer, Reginald Wingfield Spence Brown, 49, his fingers wrapped in bandages, in the custody of investigating Detective Sergeants Kerr out front and Buchanan rear. Source, the Courier Mail Library. That's the killer there. And that's our wee lass there. Although she's an Australian lass, but Armstrong's very often a Scottish or English name. Right, where were we? That evening, Bronya failed to return to her family home in Prospect Terrace in Toowong, and by nightfall, her mother, Vanda, and elder brother, William Jr., began to worry. As the evening wore on, William paced the front veranda of the old Queenslander, chain-smoking, as he studied the street for his sister's familiar figure. Vanda and her son kept vigil, while her husband slept after labouring at the Ipswich railway depot all day. At dawn, to allay his mother's rising panic and not knowing where to begin, William set off the short distance to Reginald Brown's home in Ryan Road, St Lucia, to inquire after his sister. William walked through the desolate early morning streets, arriving to discover Brown leaning over his back veranda, almost as though contemplating his arrival. Brown explained to the anxious man that he had allowed Bronya to leave work early the day before to meet up with a boy from the north who apparently had a car. Confused by the explanation, and still none the wiser, William Jr. returned home to update his mother. Nurse Major arrived for work as usual that Saturday morning at 8:30 a.m. She changed into her uniform and spoke with Brown, who was quick to show his injured fingers and hands. Nurse Major was shocked as Brown described an attack by two men and a woman in an alleyway after leaving the institute the prior evening. Brown went on to recount how one of the men had forced his hands into his mouth and bitten down, but that, thankfully, none of the villains had escaped with his briefcase. Brown had reported the incident at the Roma Street police station earlier that Saturday morning, and yet, strangely, Reginald had made no mention of the vicious attack to his wife or to his daughter when he had arrived home at 10 p.m. the previous night, several hours after the alleged affray. Brown withdrew to his office, and Nurse Major entered room 5 of the clinic to prepare for the day's surgery. It was there, lying on the floor beside a couch, she discovered the body of a woman, her face veiled under a white handkerchief. Horror-struck, Nurse Major glimpsed beneath the thin cloth square, but was unable to identify the woman, and disturbed Brown in his office. When Brown raised the material from the girl's face, He simply said, "It's Miss Armstrong. What a tragedy." By 9 a.m. that morning, veterans of the City Criminal Investigation Branch had descended upon the BAFS Institute like buzzards on their carrion. Included in the cluster was Inspectors Kearney and Harold, Sub-Inspector Frank Bischoff, who would later be appointed Commissioner of Police, and Detective Sergeant Second in Charge Stuart Kerr, who would ultimately take the position of Comptroller General of Prisons. It was Inspector Kerr who led the investigation, assisted closely by Detective Constable Don Buchanan. Uniformed Sergeant O'Farrell, who had earlier that morning taken Brown's assault complaint, arrived shortly after, immediately suspicious of Brown's alleged complaint into the ostensibly coincidental murder of Bronya Armstrong. Upon their arrival, the detectives surveyed a gruesome scene. Assisted by government pathologist Dr. John L. Tong. In an amateurish effort to portray suicide, Bronya's body lay on its back, her head resting on a cushion, her anguished gaze concealed beneath the handkerchief. Her right arm was supported by a second cushion, which appeared to facilitate the placement of a small glass ether atomizer bottle adjacent to her face. Clothed only in a brassiere, pink slip and black shoes, Bronya's light blue frock and panties were missing. The crude effort to depict suicide instantly sounded alarm bells among the experienced investigators and pathologist. The post-mortem was conducted later that day by Dr. Tong, overseen by his mentor, Dr. Edward Derrick, and revealed extensive bruising to Bronya's back, shoulders and elbows, in addition to reddening along the line of her jaw. The cause of death was pronounced asphyxia. It was determined that she had not been raped, although a presence of spermatozoa was found to be staining her slip. One out of water. Over. As they scrutinised the scene, Kerr and Buchanan's investigations rapidly positioned Brown as their key suspect. As the murder scene was photographed and Bronya's body dispatched to the city morgue, the detectives approached Brown in his office. When questioned regarding the injuries to his hands, Brown adamantly maintained the story he had earlier told O'Farrell and doggedly refused to accompany them to the CI branch. Being interviewed within the sanctuary of his office, Brown described himself as a father-like figure to Bronya and hinted slyly at her many boyfriends. He even suggested that she had committed suicide due to unhappiness at home. Later, when asked to turn out his pockets, Brown revealed notes written in his own hand outlining Bronya's intention to commit suicide in January the year before. Brown claimed that he had made the notes and kept them close to protect himself should Bronya ever fulfill her intention. If that's the case, he was thinking about it for quite some time, that murder, trying to cover his tracks. Vileness beyond belief. Vileness. As the investigation gathered momentum at the BAFSI and further at Brown's St Lucia home, William Armstrong Sr. was escorted to the city morgue to identify the body of his only daughter. His wife languished in the home that was to her unrecognisable from the previous day when her daughter had left for work. Brown was as determined in the defence of his own innocence as detectives were vigorous in their investigations. So I'm suddenly scalding bloody hot. Sorry, let me just repeat that again. Brown was as determined in the defence of his own innocence as detectives were vigorous in their investigation and confidence in his guilt. The evidence they uncovered prior to Brown's inevitable trial was both damning and, at times, bizarre. Witnesses tearfully described the terrific and horrifying screams they heard from the direction of the BAFSI rooms at about 4:30 p.m. on the afternoon of the crime. The community and Bronya's family responded incredulously that none of these witnesses had gone to her aid. Bloody Queenslanders did the same thing to me, stood by and had a party while watching me being strangled. The dirty motherfuckers out there at Wynnum. Filthy they were. Filthy. But this is what it's like in this place. Nobody has any couth or courage to defend a woman in danger. It's just filthy. Absolute cowardice. Rather see you get murdered. Think it's entertainment. What can you expect from a country populated initially by convicts? Although, to be fair, most of those people were only sent out here for stealing bread because they were hungry, but honestly, it can be a very evil city, this city. I know more than most, having survived not one, but 3 strangulations and been sold down the river again in recent memory by someone I thought loved me. Just awfulness beyond belief. But anyway, let it go, whatever, not worth my time. Right, where were we? The community and Bronya's family responded incredulously that none of these witnesses had gone to her aid. The pathologist noted bruises on Brown's knees, indicative, he argued, of kneeling over Bronya's body as she bit into his fingers and hands before she was finally asphyxiated. That poor girl. Dreadful. Several colleagues of Brown declared that his story was fictitious and defamed his character. However, for those who believed in Brown's innocence, his defiance and non-compliance with investigators was justified with the receipt of an anonymous confessional letter and the defence's assertion that Brown was framed by 2 yet unidentified men who were responsible for both the murder and the assault on Brown. However, after deliberating for less than 4 hours, the jury concurred with Justice Mansfield's summation that the willful murder of Bronya Armstrong was probably one of the most brutal and pathetic cases in the history of Queensland crime, and held Reginald Brown as guilty. Mansfield decreed that Brown spent the rest of his life doing hard labour within the confines of His Majesty's prison, Boggo Road Jail. Brown and his supporters maintained his innocence until his untimely death within the confines of the red-bricked walls. For the full story of this crime, read Murder Trails. Should it say trails or trials? There's a few typos in this book. Anyway, Murder Trails, which I suspect should say trials. True Crime Casebook, Death Before Dishonour, The Crime That Broke Brisbane's Heart by Alicia Bennett. Order at www.murdertrails.com.au. So she meant it to read as trails, not trials. Right, how long is the next one? Alright, we'll do one more, I think, and then I'll quit for the evening. It's all very bloody triggering, quite frankly. Chapter 8, The Betty Shanks Murder, Death at the Grange, 1952, written by Jack Sim. Before we begin, I'll show you the photos of the crime scene. One of Brisbane's most famous crime scenes was the hive of activity as police searched for clues. Betty Shanks met her death in a quiet suburban street, typical of hundreds in Brisbane. She was in sight of her home. The Sunday Mail, Sunday 21st of September 1952. And on the right, corner of Thomas and Carberry Streets, the Grange, circa 1952. Bauhinia bushes can be seen on the footpath. The killer hid in the shadows cast by these bushes. Source State Library, Queensland. Brisbane's greatest murder mystery remains the case of Betty Shanks. Unsolved after more than 50 years, it sadly seems increasingly likely that it will remain so. She will eternally be that girl who was killed at the Grange. She will never age, never grow old. She will never marry, never know the pleasure of children, and never complete her career. She never said goodbye to her father and mother who died without their daughter, alone and broken. She never lived to see a man walk on the moon or computers in every home. Despite the time that has passed, it is remarkable how many people still love her and care for her. No one in Brisbane will ever forget her death or stop hoping that her killer develops the remorse that he never possessed when he so violently took her life. I mean, after 50 years he might be dead by now too. But, wouldn't it be nice if people actually, I don't know, left a letter in their will or something saying that they were the killer and what they did, and at least gave peace to the remaining relatives as to what happened. It's just awful. Betty Thompson Shanks, aged 22, lived in the Brisbane suburb of Woolston with her mother and father. They had a strong relationship. She was particularly close to her father. Betty Shanks was a quiet, hard-working student with many close friends. She worked for the Commonwealth Department of the Interior and was studying in the State Commercial High School in George Street, the city. On Friday, 19th of September 1952, Betty was to attend class for the last time. Around 9 p.m, Betty caught the number 19 tram to the Grange after attending a night lecture. 2 female passengers on the tram recalled that she got off at the terminus stop number 28 on Days Road at 9:32 p.m. It took only 2 minutes for her to walk down quiet Thomas Street from the terminus en route to her home at Montpellier Street, Wilston, a suburb away. She hated being out so late as it worried her mother terribly. As she passed under the streetlight on the corner of Thomas and Carberry Streets, within sight of her house, a man hiding in the shadows cast by flowering bauhinia trees on the footpath ensured Betty Shanks would never make it home. She was absolutely beautiful. Betty Thompson Shanks, 23, student, friend, and loving daughter. At approximately 9:45 p.m, horrendous screams were heard up to half a mile away by at least 5 people. Every one of them believed the noise was children playing pranks in the grounds of Wilson State School on Thomas Street. One of the witnesses was an off-duty policeman who was reading in bed. Hearing the screams, he got up to investigate. Looking out the window, up and down the street, he saw and heard nothing, only silence. Like the others, he dismissed the sound and returned to his reading. Then he went to sleep. Another classic case of NIMBYism that Queenslanders are so infamous for. At 1:20 a.m, Betty's parents called the police after she did not come home. A search of the area was conducted, but no trace of her was found. Police tried to reassure them that they would be all right, but Mrs. Shanks was inconsolable. Betty was a girl of regular habits, never staying out without letting them know. Mrs. Shanks was certain her daughter was dead. At 5:30 a.m, Saturday, 20th of September 1952, the police constable who heard the screams the night before got up and went to get his newspaper. Lying on the front lawn of the house next door was the corpse of a woman. Those screams must have been bloody close to his home then, and he just did nothing. Isn't it fucking disgraceful? A cop did nothing. It's shocking beyond belief. He alerted fellow officers only after he found her corpse, by the way. Within a half hour, the area was declared a major crime scene and was swarming with some of the greatest detectives of the era. Soon after, it was determined that it was the body of the missing girl. The investigation began. Detectives began examining the crime scene, looking for clues. They were confident of an early arrest. Betty's battered and bruised body was lying face up, parallel to the front fence on Thomas Street. It was in a terrible state. Her face was severely swollen, where she had been punched and beaten savagely about the head with great force by a much stronger attacker. It was clear that she had fought back fiercely, but the gloves she was wearing prevented her from seriously hurting her assailant. Only a man, it was determined, could possess such strength. The attacker had then thrown her over the fence before strangling her on the ground, silencing her screams. Black boot polish on her face indicated that she had been repeatedly kicked in the head. Her gold wristwatch had stopped, presumably when she had struck the ground. At 9:53 p.m, 21 minutes after leaving the tram, Betty Shanks was dead. Look at her eyes, look into her eyes. She deserved better than a useless cop lying in bed, choosing to ignore her screams. It gets worse, so time to switch me off if you're of a delicate, in a delicate state, having trauma issues and other bad memories of sexual assault. Go and make a cup of tea. You don't have to listen or hear this. Her underpants had been removed and were lying nearby, and her skirt was pulled up. Despite this, there was no evidence of sexual assault. It was speculated that the assailant had been interrupted by the constable coming to the window to investigate the screams and did not finish what he had begun. Before fleeing the scene, the brutal murderer searched her handbag, scattering personal items on the ground. Strangely, although a small amount of money had been taken from her purse, he left the expensive watch on her wrist and a gold ring on her finger. Robbery did not seem a motive. To seasoned detectives, it was more likely the killer had been searching for something, perhaps a note or letter. Despite the killer leaving behind 2 bloody handprints on the wooden fence, no fingerprints were able to be lifted. This is when the investigation began to run into problems. Every rumour, innuendo, blood-stained garment and item reported was examined. The general belief was that it was a local who committed the crime. Police reasoned the attacker would have been covered in blood and could not have fled far without being noticed. Every man in the Wilston Grange area had to account for his movements on the night of the murder. Housewives whose husbands were notoriously unreliable were visited every day by the police until they were satisfied with their alibis. They interviewed those who knew her, looking for a motive, including her work colleagues, family, friends, relatives, local business owners, those who were riding on the tram with her that night. Investigators did discover that several days before her death, the normally quiet and reserved Betty Shanks apparently received a phone call at her workplace, which had made her grow even quieter than usual. That the attack happened so close to her home suggested the killer knew her and had targeted her specifically. But nothing in Betty's private life bore speculation of an illicit affair. There were many leads that eventually, after investigation, all trails went cold. Hundreds of leads, followed up by police, came to nothing. Nearly 60 years after the crime was committed, only two things are known for certain about Betty Shank's killer: that he had large hands and wore highly polished shoes. There have been many suspects for the crime, both official and unofficial, over the years. Their guilt kept alive by serious investigation, newspaper reports, rumour, hearsay, and innuendo. Some of these include the man at tram stop number 28. To this day he remains the main suspect, aged around 30 and dressed in a double-breasted brown suit, wearing a brightly coloured tie. He was seen acting suspiciously near the Grange terminus just prior to Betty departing the tram. Infamous headline. This front page is one of the River City's most infamous. Copies of this edition survive to this day, a macabre souvenir of the terrible crime. From the Sunday Mail, Sunday 21st of September 1952. Reward notice issued by the Police Commissioner in March 1953. The crime remains unsolved and is the oldest cold case still being investigated in Queensland. £1,000 reward. The police officer who heard the screams only a few yards from his bedroom window are as in suspects. I find that very suspicious, quite frankly. Just because you're a police officer doesn't necessarily mean you're not above the law, and there's quite a few that have been domestically violent to their own wives and children, so you can't really trust any male out there in the world, people of Earth. Unfortunately, I learnt that the hard way. Official investigations ruled out his involvement early on, but many in Brisbane's community remain unconvinced. Betty's father, an invalid war pensioner and amputee confined to a wheelchair, loved his daughter with all his heart. He did not have it in him to kill his own child, mentally or physically. Police never seriously regarded him as a suspect, though the Brisbane community did. Aren't they vicious? Blaming her father, who was clearly not capable or have the strength to conduct such a dreadful crime. An Ipswich doctor who committed suicide soon after the murder. Now that's interesting, isn't it? It's probably just circumstantial, but police have, that's written wrongly. Police have never been unable, I think they mean never been able, to find any evidence of a link. This story remains hearsay. The chemist who often drove locals home, including Betty Shanks, ruled out by police early in the investigation after being able to provide, an adequate alibi. Since 1952, many have come forward claiming to be the murderer, including several deathbed confessions. Numerous people have reported suspicions about relatives or friends, and there have been scores of unsubstantiated claims. All have been investigated and dismissed as false, or, increasingly, with the passage of time, unable to be proven either way. A reward of $50,000 for information which leads to the apprehension and conviction of the person or persons responsible for the murder of Betty remains unclaimed. Indemnity from prosecution has also failed to lead to the resolution of this most perplexing crime. It would give us all some sense of finality to know that someone has truly confessed, for detectives especially. The oldest cold case on their books can at last be filed away. The cold-blooded killer who committed this crime is either already or soon will be facing eternity. It is reassuring to know that what goes around comes around. Their eternity will be mouldering in the cold earth of the grave, forgotten, with only the thought of what they did years ago as company. The beautiful person called Betty Thompson Shanks no longer fears death, if that brave girl ever did. Long ago, she was reunited with her family. She will never be forgotten or unloved. In 2006, author Ken Blanche, who was the second reporter at the crime scene in 1952, re-examined the accepted facts of the case. His findings generated much interest, especially his theory that Miss Shanks was the victim of mistaken identity. For the full story of this crime, read Murder Trail's True Crime Casebook, Who Killed Betty Shanks? Brisbane's Greatest Murder Mystery by Ken Blanche. Order at www.murdertrails.com.au. And we're up to chapter 9, but I think I'll finish there because it's triggering and draining for me with these fucking ghastly stories. I wonder what's wrong with me actually. I'm choosing to read all this horror and darkness and paranormal stories, and then when I finish that, these real life crime stories. Time to build my beautiful life and write some beautiful romance stories and positive, upbeat, lovely endings, or children's books perhaps, something light and fluffy and joyful. I think is really much needed in my life, especially after recent horrors. So we'll finish there, people of Earth. The time is 9:44 p.m. on Saturday. What day was it? Saturday the 3rd of May 2025. So wherever you are in the space-time continuum on planet Earth, human, non-human, all sentient beings, all our relations. Stay safe, stay happy, stay wild and free, and remember to never ever let the bastards grind you down. And love is the law, love under will. And yeah, live your best life with harm to none and competition with none. So it is done. Bye for now, people of Earth. Try that again, Sam.